But
Yes.
that's so interesting, because so you didn't even know the message when you started writing the book, because you found out what the message was when you were reading all those diaries and stuff.
I think when I'm in the middle of writing the book, I'm really there in the story. You know, I'm so concerned with the characters and what's happening to them. Like at that moment, I'm not really stepping back and kind of thinking like authorially. If I can use that adjective. Sounds pretty stupid, but it's much more for me. I was really, you know, especially this one. I was so in the head of Lev and trying to understand him and his situation and everything else. And it's true. Like I really do, in the end, go back to the idea that if you tell the story properly, the message will emerge from it. And I think for me anyway, and I'm sure there are other writers who have different views on this. But if I started out thinking, I want to tell a story with a message that, you know, whatever, X, Y, and Z, it would become too programmatic. You know, I would start trying to imbue every page with that message, and that's not what I wanted to do. You know, it doesn't. Those don't tend to be the novels that I love the most. I mean, for me, I think the novels I really respond to have a, you know, are a little bit more, I think, difficult to kind of figure out whatever the message might be.
You know,
Do you have a follow-up?
No, it's not even that's something that just occurred to me, but I've been wanting to talk about the characters. I've been wanting to say, you know, how much I admire your work in developing characters. I was so, you know, I felt like they were real people that I knew. I just loved, you know, Lev, I knew the most about him, and Kolya and Vika, and, you know, like there's so many, Sonia, so many characters that I just, you know, and you weren't, it's not a long book, you know, I mean, you did a lot with really not that many words in terms of telling this great, succinct story and getting into a lot of detail and having these amazing characters. And it was real interesting to me when you said you've been thinking about this book for 6 years, and I thought, well, you must have thought of so many more things about
Yes.
all those characters.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here, wow, I really want to know, you know, the whole backstory about Kolya and about Sonia and about, I want to know more about all these characters, but I know, you know, you just made it very, you know, you told the essence to tell this story, but tell me something else about these characters. Because I know you thought about a lot more things about them.
I did, you know, and I think it probably comes from, I think most writers that I know had kind of, and not that I, you know, I had a happy childhood in the sense that, you know, I loved my family and everything else, but I was kind of a lonely kid, and I was a fairly solitary kid and didn't have many close friends. And I think that the storytelling kind of came from a desire to, for company, really, at the most basic level. And I think it's not a coincidence that you know, every book I write or a short story that I write tends to be about friendship, you know, and I think that part of what I love about writing is that it's a chance to spend time with people that I really that I love, you know. And now things are different. I have a family, you know, so I'm much happier. But I think you're always formed by who you were as a child, and I was very much like Lev as a kid. I was the smallest kid in my high school when I was a freshman. I had very bad skin. I was completely worthless in terms of talking to girls. Like I just couldn't ever get the courage up to talk to any. So, you know, writing Lev, that character, he made total sense to me. And Kolya was kind of always the friend I wanted to have and never had. You know, Kolya was this guy who seemed, on the surface, completely fearless. Turns out that he does have certain fears. They're just not the kind of obvious ones. And you know, very skilled at talking to girls, very you know, courageous in all the kind of manly ways. He was really, and I didn't have anyone like that, and I wished I had. And so, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think the things that I cut out of the book that aren't in there were cut for a reason. Like they just didn't belong there. And also, I think in some ways the characters are a little bit sharper. I mean, there were many more scenes, and the book was probably twice as long, and I cut things down. And I don't miss any of them. I really, there's not a single scene that I cut out that I regret cutting. I really think that it found its shape, not in the first draft, but in the second draft when I started editing and really hacking away the stuff that didn't need to be there. So I'm not thinking of any. There's no particular great scene that I'm thinking of that's not there that I could give you. I'm sorry.
But I just really want to emphasize. I mean, even like can't remember the guy, Korosov or something like that, the partisan who got killed.
Mm-hmm.
He was so well developed in such a short time, and like the kid they found on the roof. In the chicken coop. I mean, it's just like a few minutes they were with him.
That was,
you felt like it was a real person.
That was probably the hardest page for me to write.
Great work.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember the night that I wrote those pages. Again, I always write at night, and about midway through the book, or I was 100 pages into the book when my daughter was born. I was very nervous that I wouldn't, right before she came, I was like, how am I ever going to find time to finish this now? There's a baby coming, especially because I write at night, and I'm not going to have my, peaceful, solitudinous nights anymore. But it ended up being really kind of beautiful because my wife would feed Frankie during the day, and then at night I would start writing, and I'd start at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and Amanda would go to sleep, and then every 3 hours or 2.5 hours, Frankie would wake up and need to feed and need to get her bottle, and I would wake her up and give her a bottle, put her back in her crib, and go back to writing, And so it was kind of, I think having her there, I'm sure it infected the work in some. I don't know how. I mean, there's not a baby in the story. I don't have any conscious indication of how it did, but it's almost impossible to me, the idea that that's how I wrote the last 200 pages of the book. That there must have been some influence from it, So
it was the warmth that came to the characters.
Warmth. Thank you for saying so. Yeah.
Do you have a preference for short stories, novels, or screenplays as a writer? Do you find one more satisfying than the other?
There was a 2-year period where I was writing a lot of short stories, and I hadn't really written many before that, and I haven't written a single one since. So that was 97 to 99, and at the time I loved it, and I haven't had a single short story idea since 1999. I might have written one in 2001, and it really didn't work. It was I didn't end up putting it in my collection. Novels for me are the hardest thing to write because it's as much as I talk about how much fun it is to spend time with these characters, it's a little bit like when you're a kid and your mother wants you to take a bath and you're kicking and screaming because you really don't want to get in the bath, and then once you're in the bath you love it and you don't want to get out. That's the way writing is for me. Part of the reason I write late at night is because I'm an incredible procrastinator, and it's the last thing in the world I want to do because it's really the opening hour or two of it is kind of torturous. So I procrastinate, I check on my fantasy baseball team, I do whatever else except write, and then finally it gets to be 1 at night, and I'm so guilty because I haven't written a single word all day or all night that I force myself to write. With screenplays, it's a little bit, things go faster. I mean, for one thing, it sounds kind of banal, but it's true. They're shorter. They're just much, much shorter. So you always see the light at the end of the tunnel. When you start a novel, you have no idea where the end is. You just don't know when it's going to come, how long the book's going to be, or if it's going to work. If you just, and this is something I've talked about with other novelists, and it seems like for almost every novelist, there's a certain point in the middle of your book where you think this is a disaster, and this was a terrible idea to try to write a whole novel about this stupid story, and you feel like giving up. And really, like every novelist friend of mine that I've talked to has had the same experience. With a screenplay, because you can kind of finish it in 8 weeks or something like that, I don't have that terror. So in some ways, screenwriting is more fun, but in the end, when it's finished, the novel is much closer to my heart because, especially compared to an adaptation, because an adaptation is I'm taking someone else's story, someone else's characters. But even with an original script, really what you're creating is a blueprint for a movie. You're not creating the final product, the final work in itself. Whereas the book, I finish it, I give it to my editor. She has a few notes, but they tend to be pretty small, nothing more than a line here or two, here or there to cut or to change. And that book is on the shelf, and it's mine. It feels like mine. These are my characters. This is my story. In a screenplay, even if you've had the best possible experience, you're still you're not at the top of the totem pole. There's a director who's above you who's making decisions, which might be good ones, might not be good ones. There are actors who are going to make their decisions of how to play a certain character, and it's some of the movies I've worked on I ended up loving, but they don't feel like my work. It's a collaboration, and that can be a lot of fun, but in the end, it's not as satisfying as a novel, really, especially when the movies don't turn out well. Okay.
I was curious about that process as a screenwriter. Is it the director that has the final say on the editing? Do you have any input at all on that?
I usually have very little input. On Kite Runner, it was kind of fun because I wrote the script in English, and then Khaled's father actually translated it into Dari for the actors because most of the story was told in Dari.